Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming for the talk, and I hope you will have some takeaways after this session. I did pretty much all the introduction in the video, so I don't want to be repetitive, but if you want to follow me or ask me more questions, you can reach out to me on these social networking handles. So to begin my talk, I see more people coming in, so maybe I'll just use some filler in the meantime, right? Might as well do that. So I have funny experience every city that I visit for conferences, and I did have a pretty good experience in Vilnius too. So the very first day that I came here, I saw this Amber store, and I walked into the store, and I was just like browsing through rings, because I really like ring. And I was just walking by, and someone behind me sneezed. So I turned around and I said, Gesundheit, because I came from Germany, and Gesundheit is like, God bless you, or like good health. And that lady, she was just looking at me baffled because I said something in German. So I then corrected myself and I said, bless you. She was just like looking at me like that. And meanwhile, the lady at the counter said she wasn't sneezing. She was saying thanks. I'm like, okay, now I learned something new. If I want to say thanks in Vilnius, I just have to say ačiū. And that's how I learned my first word in Lithuanian. So yeah. Thank you. All right, so let's begin with our talk. So today I'm going to talk about automating responsive websites. So to introduce what tools to use to automate responsive website, the first thing we need to start is talking about our responsive web design. How many of you here have seen a responsive website before? Just a quick show of hands. Perfect, which means I can just give a brief introduction for those who haven't raised their hands. So responsive web design is basically a way of designing your website so that they respond to the end user's system requirements. For example, if you open a website on a desktop versus if you open your website on a mobile, the rendering of the website should change based on the layout that the user is trying to access your website. So while talking about responsive website, we can't not talk about BlackBerry Mobile because that's where all the innovation started. Back in 2001, when BlackBerry mobiles are becoming a big fashion for everyone, people thought, why not we introduce internet into the mobiles, right? That's when people started accessing internet on BlackBerry mobiles, and they're trying to access all the websites, and it sucked a big time because all the websites are built for your desktops, and if you are trying to access something on the mobile website which is built for a desktop, it's really hard. You have to either zoom in so much or like try to click on that one part that you can't properly click on your mobile. So then people started trying to come up with a way where they can develop websites to work for the mobile also. And then they started something like having two different repositories, one built specifically for your desktop and the other one built specifically for your mobile. And this became pain really quickly for the developers, right? You have to maintain two different repositories, you need to make changes in two different repositories, which is not really a fair thing. So what people have done is, they said, we need to find something else that's going to solve this problem to us. That's when Ethan Marcotte proposed something called responsive web design. So this concept is very simple. You just have one code base that can be served for different resolutions or different screen sizes. How do we achieve this? Is it even possible? Yep, it is possible by using something called a flexible grid-based layout. So if you imagine your entire website as a real estate, what this concept introduces is, think about it as a flexible elastic page instead of something that's of a fixed height, width, or length and width. So that's how we started talking about the relative sizing of the elements and the flexible layout. When we talk about flexible layout, we also have to talk about flexible media, because your images or your logos that you're using on the website should also adapt to these new resolutions, excuse me, new sizes that you're introducing. And this can be achieved by CSS media queries, which was also a big revolution with the way the website styling was done. So this is the very basic concept, and this is very developer specific, I know. But now this helps developers to make the responsive websites, right? To build a responsive website. That's fine, their job is done. Now, this is how a typical responsive website looks like. All your elements will try to align based on the size of the screen that it's being viewed on. So the best example that I can show really quickly is TestCon website. How many of you have used this website on your mobiles before? Yeah, exactly. So this is our TestCon website, right? So it's pretty responsive too, and it's really good. So you see that all the elements on the page are aligning based on the screen resolution or the screen size. All right. So when we talk about responsive website, the bigger challenge came in much later when people were trying to test these websites on the different resolutions, right? Like always, testing came in much later because we always think about testing when we already have built something. And then the biggest challenge for the testers were so many resolutions to test in, right? Can you quickly raise up your mobiles in the room? So just we can see. I'm not going to snatch your mobiles, just quickly raise your mobiles. Yeah, see, if you look around the room, you see different screen sizes, right? Every day in the market, there's new other device which comes with a bigger, better screen resolution and screen size. And it's really hard for testers to test it on every resolution. And if they have to test manually, you need to have like n number of devices in your company to do this testing, which is really painful. And to make it simple, to make it easier for all of us to be able to do this testing better, these are the top 4 things that are a good practices to follow. These things come from experience of all the people who have worked in the responsive website testing. The first and foremost thing, which is really basic and really common, is pages should be readable in all resolutions, right? That makes sense, right? I mean, how bad could it be? It should be readable on all resolutions, which means your font size, font style, font color, everything should be rendered properly in any screen size that the user is trying to access the website. And the second thing is content defined as important should be visible in all breakpoints. So what do I mean by that? When someone defines content as important, typically is your business. The business says, oh, I need this banner to be available on all resolution. Or I need the company logo to be visible on all the resolutions. Or I need a call out button, which is like buy tickets, for example, on TestCon website to be available on all resolution because that's your main business goal. So things like that, which are defined as important, is something that you can ask your business and get the requirement from them, so you can make sure that this content is available on all resolutions, because you can't test for everything anyway, right? So we need to get the important stuff out first. And the third thing is the text controls, the text boxes or buttons or anything that the user might interact with should also be rendered in all resolutions. So this is the third important point. And the fourth thing is the type data entry scrolls, which basically means if you have experience between iOS and Android, the way input boxes work is different on different mobiles, right? If you open it on iPhone, you see a tiny pop-up from the bottom coming where you can scroll to select your input radio buttons, whereas in Android, it will be a different style based on the website design. So you need to make sure you're testing it for all these different screen resolutions and screen sizes. So now that we have the things that we want to test for, what are the biggest challenges that we still have? The biggest challenge we still haven't answered is defining the set of devices that we would test the application in. So this is like a bigger problem. Like I mentioned, there are n number of screen sizes available. There could be as low as 360 by 468 to as big as 1280 by 1040, which is like the desktop resolution. So how do you choose these things? The second thing is frequent change of requirements. How many of you have noticed your website change in the past couple of months or past 6 months to adapt to the new business requirement or adapt to the new, if you're working in e-commerce domain and you have something that you are selling or some offer that you are producing on your website that you're showcasing, that has to be displayed too, and which means if you're testing it manually, it's never done. You have to test it again to make sure that the new content is being displayed properly. And that's the reason manual testing on all these devices is really, really hard. So there are a bunch of tools available to make it easier for you so you don't have to depend on your eyes and fingers to do all this testing, which make your life easier. I'm going to demo a couple of them. The first one is the Responsive Web Design Tester. This is basically a plugin that's available on Chrome. So it looks like this. It's a tiny little plugin, a Chrome extension, which I believe you can't see on that screen. So there. So this is the Chrome extension. So basically what you can do here is you can define the screen sizes that you are interested in, and you can add the screen sizes. So when you select a particular screen, select a device, what it does is basically opens a pop-up and renders the website in that resolution for you to start testing. So yeah, this is the device that we selected. So you can select either landscape or portrait mode and do the testing. So I'm selecting Nexus 7 landscape mode, and this is how it's going to render on Nexus 7. So this tool is going to help you to reduce one step where you have to manually resize the browser. It's just going to have predefined set of resolutions that you can look for. The second thing that's, I think many of you would have seen, is the Chrome developer tools, where you can select the responsive web design section, and you can define the width, height and width of the website, and you can test your website on that. So these are the nifty little tools that you can make use to quickly do the testing, but it still is not going to solve the bigger problem, right? There's still a risk of you missing out stuff because you're going to do all this testing manually. And there are some other tools that will help you automate some part of it so you don't have to do all these things manually. The best examples are Browser Stack, Apply Tools, Galen, and a bunch of other tools. There are online web checkers, and there are browsers where you just upload your required screenshots, and they do the screenshot comparison on certain resolutions. So I'm not going to talk about Browser Stack and Apply Tools, but I'm going to talk about Galen today, which is an open source framework. So Gallen Framework, it was developed by a guy called Ivan Shubin, and it's an open source tool. And it was designed specifically for responsive websites. So their problem statement before developing the tool was to make it easy for the testers to be able to test a responsive website. And it internally uses Selenium, which means basically whatever you can do with Selenium is pretty much what you can do with Galen, with an added benefit which you will see quickly. So how does Galen work? So the first thing you need to do is define a set of devices that you want to test your website in. So the simplest way I saw that helped me is to define buckets of resolutions that you would want to cater to. It's nothing different than the breakpoints. Say if you say mobile, what does mobile mean to you? What are all the screen resolutions that fit mobile size category? And then you can define something called tablet, and you can define the different screen resolutions that fit into tablet bucket. And then your desktop, where you can define the bigger screen sizes. Once you have these different screen sizes or screen resolution buckets, then you write something called a Gallen spec file, which defines how the design is going to look like on these different resolutions. Once you have the spec file and you try to run the spec file, what Galen basically does is it opens the browser, renders your screen to the defined size. If it's mobile, it's going to shrink to a mobile size. If it's desktop, it's going to expand to a desktop size, and it's going to verify the spec file on that particular resolution. Take it in slowly. I'm definitely going to do a demo, so do not worry if you do not get it right now. So what's a Galen spec file? It's simply nothing but the Galen config file that you can say, Galen file where you define how your how your application is going to look like on a particular browser on a particular size. So the biggest advantage I have found of Galen over the other tools is it's really simple to get used to this tool. The learning period is really slow. All you have to know is just simple English commands. The spec file uses things like the elements should be visible, elements should be clickable, elements should be absent, things like that. And it's human readable, and it's very minimal text to describe an entire page and be able to run it. So let's quickly see an example. So this is a spec file that I've written for our TestCon website. So what I did here is, so I've picked up some of the elements on this website that are of my interest, and I've defined them as objects on my spec file. So I've defined a header, a navigation bar. So this part is the header, and this section with all these clickable links are my navigation bar. And I defined logo and bunch of other things, like there's a buy ticket button, and there's a banner section, and There are container blocks, which are nothing but these containers that we have, which has about section or the speaker section and agenda, etc. These are all my containers. So now what we are doing here is, if you look closely, I said header section. This is basically a comment, if you can say, to divide it to make it readable. And I define here something on desktop, right? Header should contain logo, should contain navigation bar, and should contain buy ticket button, which is what basically you see here. So this part is the header. It has the logo, it has the navigation bar, and it has the buy ticket button. So that's as simple as you define the layout. And then I said its width is 98% of the viewport. That's how it's designed. Typically you would have 100%, but TestCon works with 98% width. So I said it should be X percentage of width. If you notice here, we're not defining the pixels, because when you define the pixels, your pixels might differ by 1 or 2 depending on where you're running the test. So height is a fixed height all the time, so I'm going to define the height as 68 pixel. The same section on mobile, if you're looking at on the desktop, the mobile menu bar should be absent. What is a mobile menu bar? If you shrink this hamburger icon that you see here is nothing but the mobile menu bar, and this should be absent on a desktop resolution. So that's basically it. And the similar thing in this header section on a mobile, I said header again should contain logo and mobile menu bar, and the buy ticket button is absent, and the navigation bar is also not available. So things like that. So you define on different resolution how the elements should appear or not appear on your website. Similarly, you have something called align vertically. So this is basically on desktop, all my elements, all my containers are vertically aligned or horizontally aligned, depending upon the things that you have. So these are only a minimal set of commands that I've picked up to write the Gallen spec file for TestCon website. So yeah, now we defined and we said, okay, this is my spec file, this is how my page should look like. So how are we going to run this file? That's a good question, right? So Galen has a really simple command. So you just say Galen, check, and you give the file name, and you provide the URL, and you define the size. Here I gave 1280 by 1024, and I said include everything that's tagged as desktop and save the reports in a report directory, right? So let's run this command and see what happens. So this is pretty much the command that I've shown you on the README file. So when I run the command, what Galen is basically trying to do is, it's opening the browser, resizing it to the defined size, and it's trying to open the URL thanks to Wi-Fi, which is a little slow, so bear with me. So yeah, what it's going to do is, if it loads on proper time, which it is, so it's going to do all the checks that are defined on the spec file. So you can see on the browser, on the console here, that wow, the internet is really slow. So yeah, it's waiting for the page to load. So once the page is loaded, it's going to try running all these spec definitions that were done here to make sure it's working fine. So meanwhile, when the test runs, it generates like really nice reports, like mentioned in the reports directory, where you can see what are all the validations that are done in this test and what are the things that have failed or errored out. Wow. All right, let's run it again. Well, I'm going to go ahead and show you the report, how it's going to look like had it been running. So this is how the report is generated. It will generate in the directory that you mentioned in. And if you open, it will show you all the checks that are done by Galen. So in the header section, say for example, there was an error, like you see, it said the width of this thingy is not 100% of the viewport. So then you can click and see that there is a nice screenshot where it's highlighting the element that it's trying to look for. And then it said, it's sorry, you said you wanted it to be 100%, but it's not 100%, it's just 98% of the viewport. So things like that. Say for example, I said height should be 68 pixel, which was correct, so it passed, so only one thing failed. Similarly, you can define different sections and define what they should be looking like on the website, and it will do those checks for you. Yeah, I'll wait for it to run. Meanwhile, maybe we can proceed with other parts. So this is the base example of Gallen spec file. Like I mentioned, this is the minimal set of commands that I've picked to show in the demo. But if you go to the Gallen Framework website, you can find even more commands that you can use to suit the needs that you have on your website. So Gallen spec, we discuss more in detail about the Gallen spec. It has certain things called object definitions, which I've showed you, where we define the objects on the website, and it has something called tagging, which is nothing but you tag certain elements to be available in certain ways on the website, like on desktop versus on mobile. That's what is the tagging. And you can also define using relative positions. If you have seen, I only said visible, but I could have said the logo is on the top left and the buy ticket button is on the top right. So you can always provide a relative position from one element to another element. And you can also define the alignment. The example that I've shown is vertically aligned or horizontally aligned. You can also define height and width, which we have seen example. You can also do the test on CSS property like color, font, text, color, or the other CSS properties that you can define on the elements. Let me quickly take a look at our test and see how it's doing. All right, it's doing something. Cool, so there's your logging. So what it did was, it tried to open the website, which took forever to load, right? And it was doing, see, now it's 100%. So this is one of the errors that it logs if something is failing. Similarly, let's try running it for the mobile, but this time I'm going to try some other reliable website and see if it's going to work fine. So I'm going to try our ThoughtWorks website, which is the company I belong to, and see if that's going to work. So I'm going to quickly show the ThoughtWorks spec file too. It looks something like that. I defined a bunch of elements and I defined how they have to be looking like. And the other things that I've defined is something called a test file. What basically the test file contains is, instead of typing a really long command, you can shrink your command by defining all your resolutions in something called a .test file. So if you see here, we defined devices as a table, which has a mobile resolution, mobile size, and a desktop size. And then at the bottom, you could see the command, which has, this is a comment, ThoughtWorks homepage on so-and-so device, and the URL. Size is something that I'm going to read from the table. I said check some gspec file and include the tags that are defined in the table. So let's see how that happens. So now the command is really simple. You just have to say Gallen test and your test file name and then the report directory. So what's going to do is it's going to try to load the page on the resolutions that are mentioned in the test file and see if the tests are passing. So right now we have shrunk it to a mobile resolution and we're trying to load the page, and we are going to run the tests, which will be logged on here. All right, let's proceed before that thing completes. You're going to see it in like 5 minutes maybe. So if you want to see the demo in a better internet, you can go to this URL, or you can take this QR code, just scan it with your fancy mobiles and you'll be able to access the GitHub link where you can get the code and run it on your missions and tell me how long it took for you on your mission with this internet. And so this is the basic command. I've put it on the slide for people who are interested in taking the picture of the command. All right, so what are the other features that we have with Galen? You've seen the HTML file that I've shown you already. So all the error reporting can be done using the HTML files or JSON files. It does the screenshot capturing. How cool is it, right? It highlights the element, it tells you what's wrong with that element and things like that. Other thing Galen will also do is image comparison. Though I am not a fan personally of image comparison, I think it's really helpful when you're doing for logos or things like that, which are going to be static content, because dynamic content you can never do a screenshot comparison. So image comparison is really helpful when you're checking some static content on your website. You can also define different warning levels. For example, one of the statement failed because the width is not 98% or not 100%, right? There, I can give a tolerance for the test saying, if the difference is up to 5%, it's okay, I'm fine, don't fail the test. So I can define the different warning levels and the custom errors. Again, like I mentioned, this is the very basic demo of Galen tool. You can also try writing your own code using either JavaScript, Ruby, PHP, whatever language you're comfortable with, to hook it up with your own Selenium framework so you can run this test along with your functional tests. Any questions?